All right, looks like I'm all hooked up here. Let me just do a sound check. There you go. Nice. All right. Welcome to the channel, everybody. My name is Sydney Winston, and I'm going to switch it around a little bit, and bring you some what's happening in the Middle East, specifically from the Israeli point of view, which is where I stand. Firstly, we have from JNS TV a presentation which features the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's listen in.
Thank you, Senators Bernie Moreno and Ashley Moody. I'm sure this is not your first attendance of a Jewish event. And I say that also to our friends, the representatives of Congress who are here. You will note that they are long on introductions and short on speeches, which is what I intend to do, but I want to thank all those who preceded me for their heartwarming words, your heartfelt support, the way that you receive Sarah and me, my son Yair, our delegation that includes Minister Regev of the Israeli government, our ambassador to the UN, our ambassador to Washington, and of course our consul generals in both New York and in Miami. I want to thank all of you, rabbis, Tehillah. What a force of nature this woman. It's amazing. Her parents, Chana, that's where she gets it from, and Simon, that too, our wonderful friends. We stand here on the last day of 2025, here in Miami in the great state of Florida. I don't know of anyone who doesn't go to Florida these days. And most of them stay. It's a pleasure to be among proud Jews and proud non-Jewish friends of the Jewish people in the state of Israel who understand that unity, strength, and resolve are the guardians and guarantors of our future. Unity, strength, and resolve. That's what makes the difference. Now, the tragedy of the history of our people is that having been exiled from our land, we lost strength, unity, and resolve. And the consequences were horrific, more than afflicted any other people in history. We were expelled from land to land. We suffered pogroms. We suffered massacres, culminating in the greatest massacre of them all, the Holocaust, in which a third of our people were lost. Outside here, we had a gathering, a reception, and a man came up to me. He's 101 years old. His name is Jake Waxall. Jake, stand up, stand up, stand up, Jake. Jake is a Holocaust survivor. He escaped the death camps. And I shook his hand, and I said to him, and I said to you, I say to the entire world, never again, never again, never. Never again was last year, in which we demonstrated to the would-be destroyers of Israel, we shall destroy you, you shall not destroy us. Never again is next year, and never again is forever. Because we have changed Jewish history. With the establishment of the sovereign Jewish state and the sovereign Jewish army in our defense arms, we are able to do something the Jews for centuries in the diaspora could not do. We were vilified by horrible lies, horrible lies. We're poisoning the wells. We're massacring Christian children to use their blood to bake matzos for Pesach. We were carrying vermin. And these vilifications always preceded the physical attack. We could defend ourselves neither against the first nor the second. But with the rise of the State of Israel, one thing changed. We have the capacity to fend off our would-be killers. We do that, and we demonstrated that. We restored the capacity of the Jewish people to defend themselves by themselves. We could do so with our own independent force. It doesn't mean that we've stopped the vilifications. They still continue. But we have the capacity to make sure that they don't succeed. We can do so because we have incredibly brave soldiers like Rani Gvili, a hero of Israel. A hero of Israel. Rani came to the front on October 7th, came to the front with a broken arm, and then he was shot twice, and he killed 14 terrorists before he ran out of bullets. And they killed him, and they took his body to Gaza. And I say to you, Tali Kanitzik, his beloved parents, and his sisters who are here, and brother, we shall return him. We're working on it right now. He shall be back. The first one in, last one out, but he'll be back. Back to you and back to us. We achieved after the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, when everybody thought that Israel was doomed, it was on the way down. That's what they said. It was on the way down. And could it survive? On the second day of the war, I said, we shall change the face of the Middle East. And with our incredibly brave soldiers, with our incredibly stalwart people, the citizens of Israel, President Trump asked me, how do those people, how do they stand it? How do they do it? And I said, well, see, I couldn't quote directly a great singer in Israel. I'll say it in Hebrew. You know that. It's the spirit. It's the spirit of our forefathers. It's the spirit of the heroes of Israel. It's the spirit of the Maccabees that has been reincarnated in the modern state of Israel. The bravery of our soldiers, the resolute stance of our people, and the correct and decisions that we took in the government that changed the face of battle and changed the face of the Middle East. And there was one other thing. Two things. One, the ability to do the right thing, to decide to do the right thing, and then do it in the face of enormous pressure, including one that came from our greatest ally. We had to show that our enemies saw that we would do what is necessary to protect the life of our state and the life of our citizens. And the fact that we did it under enormous attack in the world press and under very difficult conditions with our American ally demonstrated the depth of our resolve, That was one thing that was demonstrated, and it registered. But the second thing that happened was that we also had the friendship of the United States and the support of a president like no other, President Donald J. Trump, and the support that he gave the state of Israel. Now, mind you, I appreciated the fact that the beginning stages of the war, President Biden came to Israel. I appreciated the fact that he helped us in the beginning. But President Trump has been unflinching, consistent. He never wavered, including in the meetings that we just had in Mar-a-Lago. That's someplace, I can tell you. I mean, it's got better weather than Washington and a few other things. But the president is the same. His gut, his heart. We don't say gut, we say his kiss, his instinctive support for the state of Israel, his understanding of what is right, what is just. That's been there from day one. And we have shown what happens when the president of the United States and the prime minister of Israel have no daylight between them. Wonderful things, wondrous things can happen. They did, and they will. So for many, they see the wonder of Israel. They see how this small nation, gigantic in talent and in spirit, can take on enemies 10, 20 times their size and win. You could see the fact that our economy, after 2 years of war, has been rated among the 3 top economies on the planet. That's because, and I'm very proud to have led a free market revolution that unleashed the incredible talents and genius embedded in our people, in our citizens. And that came to the fore. And I have to tell you that Israel has come out of this war stronger than ever before militarily, stronger than ever before economically. Strong. What does strong mean? Well, we just signed a $37 billion gas deal. That's strong. We just have NVIDIA. You know NVIDIA, small company, $4 trillion, They decided to have a massive investment in Israel. And we welcome it. And all the economic indicators are amazing. Israel is a very strong country. And that bodes well for the future because you make alliances with the strong. You make peace with the strong. And we have opened up opportunities for peace that have never existed before. In the first term of President Trump's office, we did the Abraham Accords that brought 4 historic peace accords with 4 Arab states, and we're committed to do more. But the one thing that decides all that is our strength. It's peace through strength. It's prosperity through strength. It's hope through strength. And we are a very strong people. But it's true that we have an 8th front. And the 8th front is the rising tide of anti-Semitism around the world and the tremendous battle that we have for the truth. And if I can leave you with something today, it is this. Just as we fight the physical battle on the battlefields, and we win, we must also fight the battle for truth. We must also stand up to the scourge of anti-Semitism that endangers not only us, but every society it is infected. Starts with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. You nip it at the bud. And that requires the courage of statesmen, public representatives, and citizens. I say to you, the members of the Jewish community of the United States, the last thing you should do before anti-Semitic attacks, as they attack you, the last thing you should do is lower your head and seek cover. That's not what you should do. You should stand up and be counted. You should fight back. You should speak up. You should attack your attackers. You should delegitimize the delegitimizers. That's what you need to do. And I have a secret for you. Nobody will fight for you more than you fight for yourself. That's what happens. When Israel fights for itself, all the governments, not all, but so many of the governments in the world come to us. When Israel is strong, others want to partner with us. You stand up and be counted, and you will see the difference. Don't be afraid. Don't cower. Don't lower your head. And to the young college student who asked me before, 17 years old, he said what to do. Speak up, stand up, fight back. That's the important thing. It's called fight, fight, fight. And then we shall win, win, win with God's help. Shana Tova to all of you. Next year in Jerusalem, that's tomorrow. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone.
That was pretty nice, huh? That was Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, yesterday. That was awesome. I feel inspired by that. Fight, fight, fight. That's right. That's right. You fight. So next, that was kind of from the top, you know. You don't get any higher than the Prime Minister in terms of information, right? So now we're going to step down. And we're going to go to the street level, more the combat level, and watch the conversation on IDSF, Israel's Defense and Security Forum. Awesome channel. They have a briefing four mornings a week, and I try not to miss. They're very early here, but I try not to miss them. And if I do miss them, I catch them up as soon as they upload them. So let's do it. Oh, well, I guess I should present you guys, and then we can do it.
Everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by Ari Harrow, the former Chief of Staff of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Ari, thank you for sitting with me today.
It's my pleasure, Moshe. Good to see you.
So, a huge meeting happened yesterday. The Prime Minister speaks with the President. They have a press conference afterwards. You have the inside track on how the Prime Minister thinks, potentially what his priorities were, and how the meeting went. So what can you share with us, your initial feedback and reactions?
So I think it went extremely, extremely well. And, it's actually funny because there was a lot of chatter in the public sphere over the past few weeks, sort of, I guess, hoping to see a deterioration in the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President. And that was really cast aside before the meeting even started. There was an initial run with the press before they entered Mar-a-Lago, before they entered the private meeting where they dig into the more significant issues. And in that opening period, the president made it very, very clear that the relationship between the two leaders in the two countries is as good, if not better, than ever before. He touched upon some of the key strategic and security issues that were going to be discussed. And in those initial comments, made it very clear that from a strategic perspective, he saw eye to eye with the Prime Minister and with the State of Israel. And I think that at the end of the meeting, we saw really a continuation of that same line of thinking.
Now, let me ask you, do you think that the public face, the public presentation of how the meeting went is the same as the private one, meaning publicly, the Prime Minister gives him an award. The President spoke very highly of the Prime Minister, talking about how he was a phenomenal wartime Prime Minister. Do you think that really reflects their private meeting, or is it possible in private they were yelling and screaming at each other, horrible tension, and then they cleaned up their act in the public? How did these things usually go?
No, well, number one, I believe that the meeting was just as successful and just as warm and friendly behind closed doors as it was outside in front of the public. If there's one common thread that we see that started January 20th of this past year until today, and that is the level of shared goals that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have had, and their ability to work towards those goals together and in a very positive way. This was the sixth time that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump have met. I believe 5 of those meetings in the United States, which is by far the most meetings that any foreign leader ever in the history of the United States has had with a president. And I think that the results of that we've seen over the course of the year in action, not just in word. And whether it's the joint attack against Iran's nuclear facilities, whether it's the Trump peace plan that was very, very clear in sticking to the strategic needs that Israel had from a security perspective, be it the disarmament and dismantling of Hamas, and so on and so forth. I think that the picture that the public sees is very, very much reflective of the relationship that you see behind closed doors.
And I'm curious, when the prime minister goes to meet with the president of the US, is his mentality one of seeking permission or partnership? Meaning, is it, we have a lot of things to do in Israel, we just need the US to allow us? Or no, really, there's a much deeper understanding of the relationship. And it's not that we need permission to do things, but it's partnership. Can you give us your take on that?
So, there's a basic rule in foreign policy and foreign diplomacy, and it's what's called, I guess, the 3 Ps, right? There is policy-related discussions, there are political-related considerations, and there's personal relationships that come into play. And depending on the nature of the 2 leaders in the 2 countries that come together, there could be more weight given to one of those P's and not to the others. In other cases, it could break down differently. And what we've seen between Netanyahu and Trump over this past year is that they really are very much aligned on all 3 fronts. And I say that specifically as a result of yesterday's comments, because on the policy front, we've all heard it, right? We've seen the United States and Israel agree on policies vis-a-vis Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, Iran, etc. On the personal side, we've seen Prime Minister Netanyahu shower praise on President Trump, including, the prize that will be awarded to him. And we've seen President Trump shower praise on Netanyahu. And last but not least is really the political side. And we've seen that as well, where both leaders are willing to align politically in order to help each other out. I say all of this because it really does depend on the nature of those 3 Ps when you go into a meeting. I've been with Prime Minister Netanyahu many times in meetings with international leaders and many times in the White House, where let's just say, the president of the United States at that time, definitely during the Obama years, but with some of the other presidents as well, the interests and those 3 Ps did not align the way Israel would have liked to. And in those cases, there really is a very, very slow and calculated dance that a leader must take in order to protect his own interests. And those interests sometimes can mean that you ask for permission, and sometimes it means that you have to be adamant and state your case and not compromise, even if it does upset a country like the United States. And in an ideal situation, you're not asking for permission or going against the leadership, but you're really reaching mutual agreements. And I think that luckily that's what we've seen for the vast majority of this past year.
So somehow, without touching on Israeli politics in the next election cycle, but that personal connection that the two of them have together. So how critical is that moving forward for the rest of the Trump presidency, that the leader of Israel has that deep connection? Is that a piece of this tripod that just Israel cannot afford to lose?
So, that's obviously something that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants the public to recognize, and wants that to be a consideration when Israelis go to the ballot booths. His relationship with the United States and his understanding of the United States has obviously been a tremendous asset to the state of Israel in its ability to implement certain policies. We've seen it in the past. At the same time, voters generally vote for the future and not looking backwards. So is that a relationship that is going to allow Israel to reach future strategic goals? That ties into Netanyahu's ability to deliver the goods on some of the outstanding issues we see today. Obviously, how Gaza plays out, is Hamas going to disarm or not? Syria, are we going to be able to reach some type of agreement that allows Israel to retain our security posture on the northern border while moving forward with some type of diplomatic relationship there? Lebanon, the deadline for the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army to disarm Hezbollah is right around the corner. And that is something too that we hope and believe that the United States can play a significant role in helping materialize. And last but not least is obviously Iran and their renewed rush on ballistic missile development and potentially a nuclear program. These are all issues that if Netanyahu can show the Israeli public that as a result of his relationship, these policies can be implemented, Israel can retain its strength in the region. And then there's the peace front, right? The ability to potentially reach a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia and maybe some other countries in the region, all play into that political consideration that you're referring to. So the challenge for Netanyahu is less about portraying himself as the right person with President Trump, because that he succeeded in doing many, many years ago. People understand that he is by far the greatest leader that Israel's ever had in understanding the United States. The question for voters is going to be, though, can that deep understanding and deep relationship be translated into a successful policy?
So in terms of some of those policy issues, the media chose to focus a little bit on the violence and the extremism, the developments in Judea and Samaria as a little bit of a pushback from the administration to the prime minister. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that if you create a list of important issues that needed to be tackled, that is way down at the bottom of the list. Now, I say that not to dismiss the issue. We here in Israel hear from the leaders of the settlement, the heads of the Yesha Council, that this is a problem for them. It portrays, the vast majority of upstanding and Zionist and Israel-loving citizens in a very poor light, and it's something that the state of Israel has made clear, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made clear, that needs to be dealt with. But as far as the stumbling block in the international community, the nature of our relationship with President Trump and with the United States, and as you so rightfully mentioned, he sort of put it out there to check the box, but that is not the focal point of our relationship. Unfortunately, it is something that other countries, European countries, have used against Israel and have leveraged in their policy decisions vis-a-vis how they deal with us. So I don't want to dismiss that as an issue that needs to be dealt with, but it's not really a stumbling block as far as the United States is concerned.
So, obviously you weren't in the room, so you can't, say this with certainty. But the fact that the media picked up on that, pushed out that messaging, is probably not reflective of the tensions that happened in that meeting. There were other bigger issues to discuss.
Right. So I recall a meeting when I worked with the Prime Minister in the Prime Minister's office. I believe it was with the Prime Minister of Spain, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. I mean, this is probably in the in around 2014, 2015. And at the opening statements before the meeting took place to the media, the Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu made his statements. Then the foreign dignitary got up and made his statements. And in his statements, he said something about the need to establish a Palestinian state. The press, the press conference ended. They walked out of the room, the press that is, and the leader turned to Prime Minister Netanyahu and said, "Okay, we're done with that issue. Now let's talk about what we really want to talk about." In other words, he was stating what he needed to state for public consumption. He couldn't come to a meeting with the Prime Minister without saying it, but it was really of no urgency or of importance to him. And I think that the same is true here. Again, I'm not dismissing it, and I'm not, and I believe that it is something that is being discussed, but I do think that it really is not of true strategic significance to either President Trump or the American administration.
And in that press conference, other than talking about the ballroom, again, they spoke about Iran. What do you think was determined in terms of future military action against Iran?
So Prime Minister Netanyahu made something very clear many years ago when he called on the international community to place significant sanctions, economic sanctions against Iran. And his message was, if we act strong and we send a very strong message today, we may not need to send a military message later on. And I think that part of what we see is exactly that. Israel and the ability to project towards Iran, that Israel does not stand alone in worrying about this potential renewed threat from Iran, sends a very strong message. The fact that the President of the United States made a very clear statement on this issue, not only a willingness to back Israeli action against any renewed ballistic missile development, but a willingness to even participate if needed, if the nuclear program were to raise its head, sends a very strong message that may allow the United States and Israel to avoid a military confrontation. And that in and of itself is of tremendous value. Beyond that, I think that if we do see the type of steps that will set off, red alerts, red flags in Israel and the United States, we have proven that Israel and the United States can work together to deal with this threat. And I don't think Iran will question that ever again.
All right, I really appreciate you taking all my questions. Let me ask you one final question. So the Prime Minister's trip to South Florida is not to DC, it's not to New York. Other than meeting with the Prime Minister, with the President, he seems to be doing some other community-related work. Are you able to expound a little bit about the value and what the Prime Minister does when he's not at the UN, when he's not in Congress? Well, what else is there for him to do in the US, certainly in Florida?
Sure. Well, firstly, I jokingly told somebody earlier that he's Jewish. It's January or end of December. Why wouldn't he go to Florida, right? That's where all Jews seek refuge from the cold weather. Ultimately, if you look at all the strategic issues that we just discussed in our region, they are significant, but by far, I think this is something we can agree upon, Moshe, is that the challenges we face today are much less significant than they were on October 6th of 2023. We're in a much better position than we were. And every Israeli feels that. You feel it when you walk down the streets here. I mention that because the same is not true in the United States. The United States Jewish community and pro-Israel community feels very different today than they did on October 6th of 2023. We've seen a significant rise, not only in anti-Semitic events and anti-Semitic statements, but we've seen a true, I'll call it divide within the Republican Party that brings into question the support of Israel at that level, and is a significant strategic challenge for the Jewish community in the United States, but for us as a state of Israel. And part of what Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing while he's there is outreach to those communities, both the non-Jewish pro-Israel community. He's meeting with leaders of the evangelical Christian community, and he'll be meeting with Jewish leaders as well. At this point in time, this is truly not just a nice to have, it is critical to show that Israel recognizes the challenges they're facing, that the Prime Minister is personally involved and engaged in these issues, and that we'll continue to work with them to do our best to hopefully, lessen the flames of anti-Semitism and hate that we're seeing run rampant throughout the United States.
Okay, so I lied. I have to ask one more follow-up question if I can, a bonus question. So, forever, Israel's always been worried about its own existential existence, being surrounded by a sea of enemies who wants its destruction. Is Israel right now in a place, you think, to focus outward and not just focus on how do we save Israel, but how do we kind of go back to our roots of worrying about world Jewry and making that it's a dramatic shift in focus? If the army, if Israel is not just about protecting Israelis, but really being there for Jews worldwide, is that something you think we could see happen in Israel?
No question. I think that you go back to the early stages, not only of the state of Israel, but prior to the establishment of the state, the early Zionist days, where there were many actions that were led by residents of the land of Israel and then the state of Israel on behalf of Jewish communities all over the world. I mean, we're very familiar with the activities that took place in Arab countries with the Jewish communities in those countries, both to extricate them when needed, but to protect them and help them as well. People may be less familiar with some activities that took place in the past in Western countries. Now, the United States was never one of those countries. The United States always was a very safe and secure home for its Jewish citizens. Obviously, there are changing tides that Americans will talk about. I therefore believe that Israel will engage with the diaspora community in a much more active way. In some countries, that may be physical security, may be intelligence related. In other countries, it will be other types of support. Obviously, in a country like the United States, they have local security apparatuses and local defense apparatuses that are completely trustworthy and can do their job in protecting the Jewish community. But I completely agree. While we still have challenges that we face here in Israel, we can't turn a blind eye to everything that we discussed in the region. The need for Israel to play a proactive and strategic role amongst the Jewish diaspora and in Jewish communities around the world is necessary today, and I believe that we will see that greater involvement.
Ari Hera, former Chief of Staff of Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Thank you to all of our viewers, all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will have a briefing tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.
That was pretty awesome. Okay, so Moshe Davis, he has the daily briefing Monday through Thursday. Now I want to take you to this couple here before I switch over. they have a show, Mark and Ruthie, and there's a dynamic between them because they don't quite see eye to eye, and they're both very high up in Israeli government or elite society. And I want to introduce Ruthie to you. I love this because she's got that thing with the glasses and the glow of the magnified eye thing going like I do. Look, like there you go. This is Ruthie, and I'll let this thing run.
The Mar-a-Lago summit has wrapped up and big things are happening. We have 6 predictions for the coming year that you probably didn't see on the horizon. And spoiler alert, only 5 of them are related to Israel's neighbors. Israel Undiplomatic is next.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev. I'm here with my regular co-host, Ruthie Bloom. How are you, Ruthie?
I'm pretty good, Mark. I'm very happy to be back in Israel, especially ahead of 2026.
Well, that's what we're doing today because it is New Year's Eve tonight in Israel. Me and Ruthie are doing a special edition. We've never done this before. We're going to make predictions for the coming year, political predictions. And everyone will be invited to watch this 12 months from now to see if we got our predictions right or if we got our predictions wrong. Ruthie has 3 and I have 3.
Awesome.
Shall I start, Ruthie?
Please.
So my first political prediction for 2026 is as follows. I think there'll be an Israeli-Syrian security deal in 2026. I think the leader of Syria, the interim president, Ashara, he needs that deal. He wants the security deal with Israel so he can consolidate his rule. I think the Turks want the deal because they want to consolidate his rule. I think Trump wants that deal because Trump has good relations both with Israel and with Turkey, and he'll do everything he can to get the deal. And I think if it's a good deal for Israel, Israel can do it too. It doesn't mean peace. There's not going to be peace between Israel and Syria, but there can be peace in the essence of peace in the absence of war. In other words, peace and quiet we can do. A security deal. We had a previous security deal with the Syrians that Kissinger negotiated in 1974, and actually it stood the test of time. It was there for some 5 decades. We could do a security agreement which would allow Israel to pull out of the area of southern Syria where we're in at the moment. It would limit the ability of the Syrian forces to go south. There would be a demilitarized zone in the southern part of Syria. It would protect Israel's friends from the Druze community that live in southern Syria. It would be an all-encompassing deal which would keep Israel's borders safe, keep the Israeli population of the Golan Heights safe, keep the Druze of southern Syria safe, and at the same time, allow the Syrians to consolidate on building their new post-Assad country. It's not a perfect solution, but I think in the framework of what we have, it's the best solution that there is, and indeed it's possible, and I think it's probable for 2025.
Well, Mark, I'm sorry to, pour water over your hot coals there, but it's not that I don't agree that a deal is perhaps imminent, because President Trump really wants it, and Ashara wants to please President Trump, and Erdogan, the president of Turkey, wants to is on Trump's good side. That's the bad news about it, okay? Because those two are bad actors. Now, here's the thing. The Syrian army is made up, the new Syrian army is really, half of them are ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And, I don't think Ashara has changed his stripes at all. We know that Erdogan is still an anti-Semitic pro-jihad leader. But that doesn't mean we won't sign a deal. To say that it'll make Israel's northern border until it's really, really final, if there is such a thing. But I'm not sure about the peace and quiet when you have actors openly attacking Israel, both literally and figuratively. So I'm really not optimistic about the Syrian border. But I think that, and also here's another thing, because we don't know who the next president of the United States is going to be, any deal that we sign, that Israel signs, has to take into account that we could have a very anti-Israel next president and not have Trump's protection. And at the moment we do, because whatever Trump says, I love Erdogan, I love Netanyahu, and I love Ashara. We know that he is protecting Israel's interests, but we don't know who's coming after him.
So, first of all, you didn't disagree with me that you thought it could well happen in 2026. Okay, so you accept my prediction, and we can debate whether it's good or bad. I would argue it's better than the alternative. And the alternative is, first of all, for Israel to stay long-term inside southern Syria. We had an incident a few weeks ago where Israeli soldiers were attacked. And if there was an arrangement where we could pull out and once again demilitarize, there'd be understandings reached, guaranteed by the United States of America, right? In other words, whatever you're doing something, there's a risk, I agree, but not doing something is also a risk. And I think the deal is probable precisely because Trump wants it, as I said, and because I think the Turks want it, the Syrians want it. And ultimately, it can serve Israel's interests if it's done properly.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next prediction. And it sort of it's relevant. Every prediction here is relevant to the previous one, right? And the reason I'm skeptical about all of this stuff is after the October 7th massacre, many people woke up to how asleep Israel had been, and because of what we call the conceptia about deterring Hamas, etc. Not that I ever held that conceptia. I did not. I never thought Hamas was deterred. I was against disengagement in 2005, etc. However, let's say that many, many smart and well-intentioned people believed this. So, but it makes us have to worry about the future, about the next October 7th that could be in the wings. And that is why I'm skeptical about this. And that brings me to a prediction about the ability to disarm Hamas. We saw at Mar-a-Lago, and President Trump said, he reiterated, didn't just say, he and Prime Minister Netanyahu reiterated that Hamas has to be disarmed and that the remaining hostage, the body of the remaining hostage, Ron Gvili, has to be returned to Israel. But we've been hearing this. We say it all the time. It's a mantra. Hamas, meanwhile, says, nope. Now, that doesn't mean Hamas is severely weakened thanks to a combination of Israeli military pressure and the Trump administration. We know that. It's severely weakened. But, it's like when you leave enough of a seedling, they're always ready to pop up more and more. We saw when there was heavy rains yesterday, and they affected Gaza too, was flooding. And a whole new huge terror tunnel was discovered by the IDF right going into Israel. So all I'm saying is we cannot count on anything or anybody else.
So what is your prediction?
So my prediction is they're not going to comply, and that we are going to have to go back and fight some more in Gaza.
So I agree with the first part of your prediction. Hamas will not comply. What terrorist organization has ever voluntarily gives up its weapons? Without its weapons, Hamas loses control over Gaza. And Hamas does not want to lose control over Gaza, and Hamas does not want to give up its jihad against the Jewish state. They're not suddenly going to become choir boys. Yes, that's not who Hamas is. We know who we're dealing with. And so you're right on that. Hamas will not voluntarily disarm. I think that's a good prediction. I can agree with that 100%. The question is, can Hamas be compelled against its will to disarm? And that all depends on us, on Israel, on the United States, and on Hamas's closest two friends in the Sunni Arab Muslim world, which are the Turks, who are Sunni Muslims and not Arabs, and the Qataris, who are Sunni Arabs who are Muslims as well. These two countries, for their own reasons, want to be on as you said before when we talked about Syria, they want to be on President Trump's good side, and they cooperated with him in the deal that brought about the ceasefire arrangements. And can they put pressure on Hamas to get a deal where they are forced to disarm? I don't know. Maybe once again you'll need Israeli military pressure. Israel will have to strike. Israel will have to act like we're doing now in Lebanon, or we'll have to act at will to make sure that Hamas cannot raise its head again. That's a possibility. But I agree with your prediction. Hamas is not going to voluntarily disarm. It's not going to keep its commitment. And we heard President Trump at Mar-a-Lago say that if they don't keep their commitment to disarm, what did he say? All hell will break loose, or something of that sort in Trumpian English. There has to be a threat, and maybe that threat will have to be implemented.
But
And here, I hope there's pressure on Hamas's closest friends, Qatar and Turkey, from Washington, that when they say all hell, that it'll hurt their relations with the United States unless they put the necessary pressure on Hamas.
right. But again, the word pressure, I'm talking about guns. I'm talking about guns aimed at those terrorists. I'm talking about striking, including from the air if necessary. And President Trump said something that I didn't agree with. He said, all these countries, we've got 54 countries. So, and if Hamas doesn't disarm, they're going to make them disarm. Baloney. The only country that can make or can try to make Hamas disarm is Israel. It's up to us, and we're the most closely affected by Hamas's being armed. And I think we're going to have no choice, and we're going to really have to. Hopefully, this won't cause conflict.
What we can both agree on is, of course, the so-called international force is not going to disarm Hamas.
No.
No one's going to send their soldiers
Nobody.
into Gaza to disarm
Nope.
Hamas either. If it's going to be done militarily, it's going to have to be Israel.
Right. And what we have to hope,
Yeah.
the best we can hope for, is that the so-called international forces will at least not get in our way by attacking us verbally and any other way. Okay. That's our biggest problem. I would always say, if you're not going to do it, at least allow us to do it. And I have to say, President Trump has been great in that respect, unlike President Biden before him. But, I don't trust the international community, so to speak. And that's all. So we're going to have to do it. Okay. So now what's your next prediction?
So the Regev second prediction is actually pessimistic. There was a while ago that I was more upbeat about the possibility of an Israeli-Saudi breakthrough. I thought that all the reasons were there for it to happen. I thought it was a Saudi interest, an Israeli interest, and an American interest, and everyone, it was all going to work. And I have to tell you today, as we stand, I'm more pessimistic. And my prediction, I'm sorry to say, I'm not happy to say it, but I think it's today a correct analysis of the situation is that it's not going to be an Israel-Saudi breakthrough in 2026. I also noted how the leaders spoke at Mar-a-Lago. They say, of course, we want it, but the language they were using was much less, this is something that's going to happen anytime soon. It was like, this is our commitment and we want this to happen. This is a goal we want to reach, yes, but it wasn't like this is about to happen anytime soon. It wasn't expressed either by Trump or by Netanyahu that this is something that is like on the cards in the near future. And I here want to blame the Americans a little bit. If there would have been a deal, it would be because the Saudis understood not only did they get the benefits of peace with Israel and normalization with Israel and all the cooperation that can give them, but it also would allow them to upgrade their relationship with the United States of America. And that was an important reason why they were going to do the deal. And it appeared to me on the last visit of the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who was in Washington, what was it, a month, 2 months ago? He got a lot of goodies from America, a lot of upgrading in the relationship, military, political, defense commitment, and so forth. And he did all that without normalizing ties with Israel. And so the question is, if he can do all that without normalizing ties with Israel, so the motivation for him to normalize ties with Israel is, I would argue, less so. Now, is it possible that there's some secret deal that he made some promise to President Trump that he'll normalize ties and all this is like just payment in advance? I don't know. I hope it's true, but I haven't seen any indication of that at all. And so my prediction, unfortunately, is that for Israel-Saudi peace, it'll happen. but it's not going to happen, according to my prediction, in the next 12 months.
You know, it's interesting. I agree with you, by the way. Also, you know, what we know about Israel and Saudi relations is that there's been much going on, has been going on behind the scenes, and not just since Trump took office. I mean, there's been that kind of quiet cooperation. We know that Saudi Arabia allowed Israel to use its airspace because the one thing we do have a common interest is in defeating the Iranian regime. But here's the thing about Saudi Arabia, and it reminds me of Egypt. Saudi Arabia, though you have a kingdom, okay, it's not a democracy with democratic elections. If the crown prince believes, and he's probably right to believe it, right, that if he doesn't come off as totally pro-Palestinian state and Israel, without a Palestinian state, there's never going to be normalization with Israel, because he says he needs it for his street, even though there are no elections. What he's afraid of, I guess, is being overthrown, right? I mean, if it's a kingdom, that's what you're afraid of. And if that is the sentiment in Saudi Arabia, which is if it's anti-Israel and pro-terrorist sentiment, Palestinian terrorist sentiment, then what you're going to have is something similar to Egypt, which is Egypt did sign an actual peace treaty with Israel decades ago, and yet the whole populace of Egypt remained anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, allowed all kinds of weapons and building materials to go into Gaza, etc. So, you know, if that's the kind of deal we're going to have with Saudi Arabia, I don't want it. And I just think it's very important not to constantly say, oh, MBS, he's just this modernizer, not so fast. That's my view.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what's the next on our list that my next prediction is supposed to be? Let's say, you tell me.
You wanted to talk about Iran. Correct.
Now that's actually, it's a perfect segue because I just mentioned that Saudi Arabia and Israel and all the Abraham Accords countries, by the way, have this in common, that the desire to defeat the Iranian regime because of it and certainly its nuclear capabilities. But also, by the way, and President Trump added it this time, its ballistic missile capabilities, not just in the past, he was talking about only nuclear weapons.
I spoke about that last week on the podcast. And I said, we Americans have made a commitment that won't allow Iran to move its nuclear program. And I said there was a certain question mark whether, because Israel has very real concerns about the ballistic missile program. I said I wasn't sure that was the American position.
Right.
But Trump made it the American position.
Not only that, what he said was, he answered a reporter's question and he said, ballistic missiles, yes, we'll definitely have to go after them. Nuclear, fast, we'll go after them immediately.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So he was very clear about that, about all of the weapons. But here's the good news about Iran. What he said is, if we have to, we'll strike. I mean, he said something like, we'll hit the hell out of it.
You're not making a prediction.
Wait, give me a minute. I'm making a prediction. He said, something like, we'll strike the hell out of them. Now, what is happening in Iran? My prediction is that by the end of 2026, the regime will fall. Of course, you know, it sounds like it's way too optimistic, but the reason I think so is that if President Trump is willing to engage in another military operation with Israel, in some fashion with Israel, I don't think by itself. Israel would definitely be part of it. While Iranians are taking to the streets. Listen, it's not the first time Iranians have taken the streets to protest the regime, but this time is different. Why? Because many different sectors are taken to the streets. There are the bazaar, the merchants. There's chaos.
Good one.
The rial has plummeted. There's no water. Well, now there's snow, but they had a terrible drought. They had terrible power outages. They really are in dire straits, and the Iranian people are fed up. They're also disgusted with the fact that their regime that always gunned them down in the streets and made the women, wear hijabs and all that. But not only that, is that they're willing to spend their last nickels, so to speak, on weapons and on spending money on terrorism around the world when their own people are suffering so badly. So I believe that there is going to be another military operation that, coupled with the people in the streets, I think is going to bring down the regime. And by the way, It's the first time we've heard the Mossad directly on social media say, we're with you, to the people of Iran. We're with you, not only in spirit, we're also on the ground. Now, you and I both know it was likely we had Mossad agents on the ground, but that was all sort of, we assumed it. And we know because of certain, operations that couldn't have happened without that. But they're saying it. The Mossad's announcing it. So I believe that by the end of 2026, the Iranian regime will fall.
I hope that you are correct. What is interesting, what do all authoritarian, despotic regimes have in common? That they live off the fear of the people. It's like Machiavelli said very famously, I think in the time of the Renaissance or the pre-Renaissance, that as a leader, it's better to be feared than loved. He said it's better to be both, but if you have to choose, it's better to be feared. And authoritarian regimes stay in power because their people fear them. They fear that if they speak out, something will happen to them. They fear the violent retribution of an authoritarian regime. And what happened last year in the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, and then with the United States coming in and helping finish the job, is the regime was exposed as being weak. And that's the worst thing that can happen to an authoritarian regime that needs the fear of its power to stay in power. And then you add that with all the economic problems that you've spoken about, whether it's the currency that's fallen, through the floor, whether it's the shortages of water, whether it was the shortages of foodstuffs, whether it's the shortages of power generation. The people of Iran, and it should be one of the richest countries in the world, right? It's got all these, oil reserves and so forth. And it's a poor country because it's being mismanaged by a group of thugs who prefer to spend money on Hamas and Hezbollah than on hospitals in Tehran. That's the bottom line. So I believe it's possible. We've had, as you said correctly, there have been popular outbursts against the government, demonstrations. We saw it recently with the hijabs. Before that, we saw it after they tried to fix elections in a too obvious way. They always fix their elections, but in an overly obvious way. We've seen it in the past, but maybe now the combination of people power, genuine economic stress inside Iran, serious economic suffering, together with the regime being exposed as weak. I think that's a combination that could lead to regime change. It has to come from the Iranian people. But I think that's a combination that wasn't there a while ago. With that, one word of caution. Other despotic regimes fall or have fallen historically because the army saw itself as part of the people and wouldn't shoot demonstrators in the streets. The Iranian regime has its Waffen-SS or its KGB. It has the Revolutionary Guards who will shoot indiscriminately people in the streets. They can do a bloodbath. Unlike, let's say, when Egypt had its revolution, the army refused to shoot the demonstrators. And so that's my one word of caution, that this regime, though it lacks legitimacy, does it have enough loyal cadres, yes, loyal supporters who are willing to pull the trigger and actually massacre thousands, tens of thousands of people in the street?
Okay, so it's interesting you point that out, because I was going to say that I predict that many Revolutionary Guards are going to defect. The reason I predict that is, all these years, very many Middle East experts whom I really admire and who've proven right again and again, one of the things they said about the regime is that if the West attacks the regime in any fashion or attacks the nuclear facilities, that the Iranian people will rally around the regime. And this was one of the fears of the West or of Israel as well. We don't want to poke the bear too much, because rather than helping the Iranian people, all it'll do, it won't work. I believe that after these strikes, Israeli and American strikes on the facilities, what we saw is it didn't happen. The people did not rally around the regime. They saw it was weak. You're absolutely right. That the regime was exposed as weak. But the people didn't rally around the regime because their own personal conditions by this point were so bad. So I also predict that there will be defections from the besieged militias and the revolutionary
I
government.
hope that's true, and it's also, I mean, it's quite possible that the populace blames the regime, its policies of supporting terrorism and a nuclear program, and they're saying, of course, the Americans and the Israelis are going to do something, right? To what extent do the Iranians, right, understand that the reason they're getting attacked is because of the policies of their government? My last, and for this year, final prediction. I'm going to say something that is good, but maybe it is good. I'm going to predict that in 2026, there will not be a major Israel-Lebanon war, as we've seen. I say that not because I think Hezbollah will disarm. Hezbollah is supposed to disarm. The Lebanese government is supposed to be doing it. That's clear that that's not happening. Like Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon does not want to disarm. That's clear. And it's clear the Lebanese government is afraid to take on Hezbollah, and what they're doing is very, very little, if anything at all. But I still think there will not be a major war because Israel will continue to do what we're doing, which is to hit Hezbollah targets in Lebanon with the support of the United States and even others in the Arab world and even some of the Europeans, saying we can keep hitting Hezbollah and because they haven't disarmed. The Lebanese government will take small steps because it has to show it's doing something against Hezbollah to disarm Hezbollah. But basically, I'm saying more of the same in Lebanon, but not all-out war. More of the same, Israeli strikes against armed Hezbollah positions when they're making their missiles, where they're storing their munitions against their senior commanders. We have the legitimacy to do so because Hezbollah was supposed to disarm and they haven't. The Lebanese government, this will prod Lebanese government to do more than they have been, but it still won't be enough. And so I say, my prediction, 2026, Lebanon, Israel, more of the same.
You know what? I agree with that. As long as it is more of the same, I can live with that, by the way. As long as we keep firing as soon as we see a terrorist or terrorist infrastructure, and we remain in the places we are stationed in Lebanon to guarantee that. Okay, so now my last prediction has to do not with the neighborhood, but with Israel itself. We have entered an election year in Israel. All right. And we can see how there are people forming parties or trying to, or, feeling the way the winds are blowing to decide whether to join one party or another or to create a new party. And so, and there are polls, and interestingly, on the left-wing channels, the polls say that the opposition is going to sweep the elections and oust Netanyahu, and the right-wing channel has polls saying the opposite. Okay, I predict that when there's an election, that Netanyahu and the Likud party, Netanyahu will still head the Likud party. I mean, he will be elected again as head of Likud and will garner the most votes in that election yet again. Then the only question that remains, and here I'm not sure, and here I'll ask your opinion, whether that means that there will be enough of the what we call the coalition members, or Netanyahu's current government, whether he'll be able to form a government easily or not, or whether we will hit another impasse as we had several election cycles where neither side is able. But I do predict he will win the Likud primary and the general election.
So winning the general election means he has to be able to form a government. I mean, if he can't, it doesn't matter if he's the largest party. If he can't, doesn't he have 61 members of the Knesset, then he has.
No, I meant win. I meant that Likud will come out the strongest party and that he will head it. The question is whether he will be able to form a government.
So I don't think, if you don't mind me saying, Ruthie, that's not much of a prediction, because even the polls and the left-wing stations that are the most critical always have the Likud as the largest party more than anyone else, right? Even they might have him in the low 20s, but he's still larger than everyone else, right? There hasn't been a poll for ages that has had Bennett ahead of Netanyahu. So I think that's a very safe bet. The real question is, will Netanyahu be able to form a government?
And what do you think?
So I want to say the following. First of all, it's going to be very close, and it'll depend on all sorts of things. Will there be a party on the right that doesn't pass the threshold and votes are wasted? will the Arab parties unite or not unite? Because there were 3 votes, 3 Knesset seats that were wasted because one of the Arab parties went alone and they didn't pass the cutoff and they wasted votes, right? So you could have a perfect storm if the votes are lost on the right and votes on the other side are made, votes that were previously lost. Just it can change reality, right? What's going to happen? I would ask the following question, okay? You're always talking about the left, what they call in Israel, the Kaplanistim who hate Netanyahu, okay? They hated Netanyahu last time, and Netanyahu got 64 seats in this coalition, which means he was 3 above what he needed, okay? My prediction is that for Netanyahu to win and to form a government, he only needs to get the people who voted for him last time to vote for him again. Once again, the people who hated him, who didn't vote for him last time, he doesn't need them. He only needs the people who voted for him 3 years ago. And I think from his point of view, that is doable. Would I bet my house on it? My savings that are the inheritance of my children? No, I would not. Yes, because elections, only in Syria under Assad did they know the election results before elections happen. But I think, to use an American saying, yes, it's Netanyahu's to lose. Once again, remember this: the people out there, and they're always being interviewed on the media, both Israeli International, the people who say enough of Netanyahu, they were against Netanyahu 3 years ago, right? All he has to do to win is to get the same people to vote for him who voted for him in the past. And demographically, so there are more in the ultra-Orthodox camp who are voting because they are, but there are also more Arabs who vote for the other side. So that sort of evens itself out in many ways. I remember immediately after the 7th of October, people said political toast, right? How he was Mr. Security, and that he'd let the country down, and there was this terrible massacre on his watch, and most people thought that was it. His political career was behind him. But over the last, 3 years, he's slowly but surely notched his way back up, and once again, he's not only competitive. I think it's for him, it's his race to lose.
Oh, I totally agree. But by the way, it's true that we thought, it's true now also, the anti-Netanyahu camp constantly stresses how he never took responsibility for October 7th and that he was the prime minister and therefore he has responsibility no matter how many of the others all believed in the conceptia that led to October 7th. But what we've seen is we all agree with that. Okay, he was prime minister. But the question is what he did after October 7th and since October 7th. And many, many people say, wow, without him, even Trump said it at Mar-a-Lago, without him, it's Israel that would have been toast. And so that is how he has survived and thrived. That's how, not by accident.
Yes.
So
I would also, I asked the following question, and I look at the other people who want to be prime minister, and we know their names, and asked the following question: when the Israeli government went against the Biden administration, said we're going into Rafah nevertheless, and we were told by the Americans, don't do it, right? Retrospectively, definitely the right decision. Netanyahu took it, right? If you look at the decision to take out Nasrallah, a very controversial decision. Inside Israel, there were different debates. Netanyahu took the decision. No doubt it was a game changer. Would another prime minister have made the same decision? Going and initiating the 12-day war with Iran, which was a great Israeli success in the end. The Americans joined in too, right? Would another Israeli prime minister have asked permission of the White House to do it first? What would the White House have said, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons, yes, that Netanyahu how he's acted since October 23. He has fought his way back politically. We have made, you and me, 6 predictions. 3 you've made, 3 I've made. We could be wrong on all. We could be right on some. We'll have to wait till next year. But until then, I wish you and all our viewers and listeners a very happy new year. May 2026 be a year of success, of peace, of prosperity.
Yes, Happy New Year. And we can also add to our Christian viewers, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
There you go. There you go. Israeli news from Israeli Jews. I think I'm going to make this a regular thing. To everybody who's watching right now, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just really appreciate the company. Thank you. That's going to do it for me for now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.